Okay, I've been given approval to officially start the session. This is a visualizing survey data with Tableau. My name is Steve Wexler. I'm the founder and principal of Data Revelations, and I've been using Tableau since the Australopithecine era. I go back to 2006. I've been using it since version 2.0, and in fact, I've been visualizing survey data with Tableau since then. And it probably accounts for about 40% of my practice. So very briefly, I'm going to show you our agenda, which is we want to take stuff that looks like this and turn it into stuff that looks like this, and like this, and like this. A little bit better than that, please. Much, much better. Thank you. So, first part, I don't know if you're creating the survey yourself or someone is giving you the survey and saying, here's all this great data. Please help us glean and find amazing insights in it, but know what the survey is. So I will ask, people will send me data, but I will always ask, could I please see the survey instrument? Either a printed copy of the Word document or whatever they use, or I'd like to see it online and see how is it presented. So I like seeing this. So this is a typical yes, no, maybe question. Here is a check all that apply question. Okay, so I'll see where this is in the survey. This is a Likert scale question. How many people went, no, that's not how you say that word. It's Likert. The guy's name was Rensis Likert, L-I-K-E-R-T, sort of like Elisa Fink, E-L-I-S-S-A, and everyone thinks her name should be pronounced Alyssa, but it's Elisa. She's the chief marketing officer at Tableau. The guy's name was Rensis Likert. The correct pronunciation is Likert. In any case, this is where you're welcome, whomever is the, there. So do you lose bar bets over this when people say, no, it's Likert? It really is Likert. He was I always have to explain that because people think, oh, this guy's supposed to know what he's talking about, but he doesn't even know how to pronounce the scale name. The guy was the founder of the Human Resources Institute. In any case, this is an attempt to apply quantitative measures to qualitative notions. So to what degree do you agree or disagree with the following statements, and not at all, small degree, and you would apply a scale like a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 to something. So there are a couple of other type of questions that we'll be looking at, like a benchmarking question, which is, on average, how many hours a week do you spend on such and such? Or what is your annual salary? But this should cover quite a degree of them, and you should see, okay, how does that stuff map to the data I've been given? So the yes, no, maybe question might look like this in the spread. I'm going to be dealing with the data in a CSV file or a spreadsheet, but it doesn't matter. It can live in a big honking database. The concepts involved are exactly the same. So here was our check all that apply question. And you've got the yeses and the nos. And here's the Likert scale, indicate the degree to which you agree or disagree with the following statement. Now, often when you get your survey and you're downloading it from whatever survey system you're using, you can either download the results as text responses or as numeric responses. So when somebody asks you, well, which do you prefer, say yes. You want them both ways. So here is it, do you measure these things, yes or no? And here's how it might be rendered as zeros or ones. I hate survey systems where they put a yes and then a blank in. And the problem, any of you know why there would be a problem if you just had a yes or and a blank? Because you can't tell if they ditched the question completely. So you have to look, was everything blank? Then they didn't answer. If one thing was selected, then you know they answered something and you know to count the question. So I like to see zeros and ones, not ones and blanks, or yeses and nos. Same with the check all that apply. With the Likert scale question, I thought we had it there. Oh, this is what do you measure? Oh, I guess I left it out. Where you'd have the a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. That goes with the not at all, a little bit, neutral, agree, strongly agree. All right, so I hate when you have a slide when some guy's trying to talk that has a lot of verbiage on it. Bottom line is, biggest impediment to success with visualizing survey data is getting the data in the format that you need to be in. That's kind of true of everything with Tableau. So I'm going to spend some time and discuss new ways I've discovered to take the data that you may have, get it in a format so you can really be fast with analyzing stuff. How many of you have either read some of the blog posts I might have had on reshaping data or the Tableau survey, the Tableau white paper on how to do this? You're welcome. I thank Tableau for having me write that. I'm going to show you a few things that go beyond it, things that I've kind of learned in the last 6 months, 12 months that will help a little bit more. So let's do a demo of this. I'm going to use the free reshaping tool that comes from Tableau and add in for Excel. And I'm also going to show you how to do it with what I think is a considerably more powerful mechanism, which is the ETL, the Extract, Transform, Load facility that's in Alteryx. And I do encourage you to check out a demo of what they've got going on. So let's take a look at our data, see what we've got and what's going on in it. So from my survey provider, whether it's SurveyMonkey or one of the really high-end sophisticated tools like Qualtrics, I've gotten this Excel file. And here's the data as rendered as text responses. Here's the same data as numeric responses. I hope that looking at this, it resembles your data in some way. I can't imagine it. If it doesn't, if you've never seen something that looks like this and you're you're dealing with survey data, I want to see what your data looks like, because then it's different than anything I've seen in the last 8 years. In any case, you see that row number 2 over there? You've got the IDs for each question up at the time. This is Q1, this is Q2, this is Q3. And you've got this actually useful thing here. Don't just discard it. We're going to talk about it. We're not going to throw any parts away, or for the most part, in dealing with this. Also, I've conveniently set up my questions, everything in here, so that my so-called demographic questions I put in the front. Like might want to filter or show what's the difference in responses from men versus women. What's the difference in responses for people in South America versus North America? Difference in opinion and generation. And, since a lot of people have asked about this, how do you do weighting in a survey? And so I have another column in here, which is there's a weight that's applied to each survey respondent. And that's the way I usually see it done, but it can also be done where you can anyone you can in Tableau say anyone that falls into this category, give them this weighting. Anyone that goes into this category, give them this weighting. Usually what happens in most surveys, you get the critical demographic questions at the very beginning of the survey, like are you alive, yes or no, et cetera. But you don't want to bludgeon people with too many questions. So you'll have the thing which is like who's your favorite Beatle or something like that at the end of the survey. But you're going to need to, if you're using the Excel free reshaping tool, you kind of need to put all the things that you're going to cut the data by at the front. If you're using something like Alteryx, they can go any place. So I'm going to start just by taking this stuff. I'm going to create a new tab here. I'm going to call it Demographics. And I'm going to paste this stuff in, and I do not need this blank row. However, this stuff is very useful for the questions that I may be analyzing. Q1, oh, that's pulse rate. Q2 is metabolism. I don't like having to right-click and alias everything. So I want this stuff. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do, and I think a lot of people already have this. Yeah, I'll just take these two things, copy this, let me paste, and let me transpose the data. And it's all my demographic stuff. And this will be my question ID. And this will be my wording. And if you have never done this before, you're going to really like how this is going to make your life easier. Let's see. There we go. And do one more thing here. So I've got my question ID, the human readable form of the question, and then I'm going to put a grouping. By the way, I need you to hang with me for a little bit as I set the data up, right? I want to show you, wow, look at this cool way to visualize this, this, or this. But this is something I haven't blogged about. I think I'm seeing nodding heads, and a bunch of people have put it in and have kind of figured out how to do it. So this is a question about voting. This is a question about salary. Here are all these questions. These are all check all questions. And obviously, you may have different sets, so check all that apply about what you measure. Check all that apply things that you buy, et cetera. And these are all Likert scale questions. And you may have a really hip survey system that generates this for you automatically, and I'm happy for you. I don't, or none of my clients do yet. And so I'll take a little bit of time and I will do this. It takes 5-10 minutes. It's a little piece of scaffolding, or I just call it my question helper. All right, so I've got my demographics here. I've got my helper stuff here. Now we got to get down to the brass tacks of this thing, and we've got to reshape the data. And Mark Reeder was showing you that, and this cool ability that's going to be in Excel, and we'll take all these things that are all these millions of columns and not so many rows and turn it into not so many columns and lots of rows. That's the crucial part to all of this. So let me get rid of this stuff. And I'm going to go right to this location. So I need the response ID. But I don't want to have a separate column for every question that's in the survey. You probably have 300, 400, 500 of these things. You will be miserable attempting to visualize survey data if you get it in this format. And this is the way that it comes when you say, I want to download a CSV, or I want to do this, that, or the other. So how many of you have discovered or know about the free reshaping tool, the Excel add-in, that you're probably discovering, yeah, but it doesn't work on the Macintosh, or sort of stuff like that, et cetera. Great little facility, has helped me out, gotten me through 5-6 years of pain and suffering. I loved it. I no longer use it, but I feel obligated to show it to you. Because I'm not going to say because there are alternatives, but they cost something. So I'm going to reshape this data. So instead of having, I don't know how many columns I've got, 30 or 40, I'm just going to have 3. And it created over 8,000 rows. And I'm going to call this one my question ID. And this is going to be the text response.
Question.
Yeah.
Is it important that you got rid of all
The demographic stuff, no harm in having them. It's just adding additional rows. Also, I purposely put generation, gender, location. But I may want to promote one of these questions like, do you want to vote do you plan to vote in the next election? Maybe I want that to be a question I analyze and a way that I want to cut the data. So I may have it live in both places, both as I want to cut the data this way, or I want it to just be one of all these questions. So this is good. I know you're going, wait a minute, I thought you said text response, but that's clearly a number. Well, that was, please enter your salary. And that's never going to be, that's a number they enter. It's not going to be pretty big as something that somebody types in. So text where there is text, values where there are only numeric values where there are numeric values. I've got to do the same thing here. By the way, the reason I'm not a big fan of doing this is 1, it's tedious, 2, it's error prone, 3, more often than not, I get those check all that apply questions where it's a 1 or a blank versus a 1 and a 0, so I have to do all sorts of stuff in here. And if I were Lewis Black, really deliver the thing that really annoys me is when the client says, oh yeah, the survey's closed, and you've done all this stuff, and it's taken an hour and a half, you got everything just right. If you have to deal with their sloppily coded stuff, you put in all these calculations that say if everything is blank, cool. Otherwise, put zeros in so that I know that they answered at least one of the check all that apply. They come back and go, you know what, we really wanted to get those additional responses from Latvia. And the survey, so can we add these 50 additional responses, et cetera? So it's, it works. You'll get the data the way that you want, but it is error prone, it is tedious, and it doesn't allow for, I want to start visualizing the survey when it's halfway done. I want to get a jump on this thing. I want to see if there are any trends or stuff that we should be looking for early on. So let me go through one more step with this. We're just about done. Let me go here. Let me reshape the data. And you see what I'm going to do here. This is just the values or the veils. By the way, the person who's presenting immediately becomes the worst typist in the room. It's just a given. So what I'm going to do here, copy this, and let me paste this in here. So I got my text response, and let me get my numeric response. So zeros and ones instead of yes, no, maybes, etc. And hold on, let's see if everything lines up. That feels so good. Everything, the same number of responses on the text. How many times you've seen, oh crap, there are 2 extra ones down at the bottom. I hate when that happens. And I will just call this, merged. And let me save this under a different name. And so I've got my demographics, I've got my helper file, and I've got both my respondent ID, the question ID, the text response, and the numeric values. It's going to make my life way easier because sometimes I need numeric stuff, sometimes I need text stuff. And for years, I have been using this tool, and I would now go in Tableau and connect to this thing. Andy Cott-Grieve, who is a brilliant Tableauian presenter, kind of Zen master cat herder. I had to run the session through him. He said, why aren't you clicking the open this in Tableau thing that I lobbied to put in the tool years ago? I said, good point. So let me just click on open in Tableau. It is amazing the stuff that, how long is that incredibly useful feature that I didn't know about been in the product? Okay, 4 years or stuff like that. Yikes. So in any case, we're set. I'm connected to the right data set. Everything is fine. I'm going to start by taking my demographics. Then I'm going to take my merged, that has the reshaped data with the text, reshaped data with the, boy, people are good. I'm just going by the, yes, we know this, move. Okay. And I just love this. It knows that I'm joining this on response ID. And now let me get my also ever so important helper sheet. I only started doing this about a year ago, and it's made a huge difference. In fact, it's certain things that solve, and it's mapping the question ID to the human language readable version of the question ID. And I will tell you this, though, I am still in the habit of creating an extract TDE file. I've just had too many times that I've been burned connecting directly to Excel. They put all this effort into getting rid of the jet engine and allowing you to do stuff with Excel. I just find better performance with creating a TDE file. Question here, Elizabeth.
Just a quick question about the merging function. Could you have just merged, so you had one that was values and one that was text, and they were all by respondent ID?
Right.
Could you have used that?
I could, you know what, I could have done the join on that and then gotten rid of the fields that I didn't want, et cetera. Absolutely. But the question for those who are, it's now many months and somebody's listening in on the session, could I have done instead of copying and pasting those things, done a type of join and gotten it that way? And the answer is yes, and that's kind of the way I do it when I do it in Alteryx. In any case, let's have it create a TDE file. I'll go to the worksheet. I will call the TDE file something somewhat less cryptic. Actually, it's not cryptic at all. It's the name of the file and it's the name of the sheet or some stuff like that. And I've got everything that I want, and I'm seeing that I've gotten these things from 3 different tables. I tend to prefer I prefer using group by folder, because really I don't need to know that these came from this table and this came from this table. It also means if I want to create calculated fields and group them together by function, not by where they came from, it's easier to do so. All right, so almost always, in fact, no, not almost always, always. First thing I do is I want to know who my respondents are before I start analyzing, who answered these questions. So I'll put gender up on rows, and much to my delight, I have male, female, and not null or unknown or things like that. It's like, okay, good. That's data that doesn't need to be cleaned up. By the way, Tableau is great at helping you discover where the nasty bits are in the data. And what I need to do here is then count the unique number of respondents. Something I didn't dwell on for a second is when I did this reshaping of the data, is, wait a second, you mean you've got a separate row now for every respondent? But for a separate row for each respondent for each question they answered? Yes. So if I were to just say, I want to count the number of records, sum the number of records up, or something like that, I'm going to get way more people than there should be, or if I wanted to just count that. So this is a case where I need to count the distinct number of respondents. So I've got the respondent ID. By the way, if I didn't have a respondent ID, I would have put one in there. If somehow I have yet to see that. There's always some type of unique identifier for each of the response from any grown-up survey system. And I've got the information here. I promise I will come back and say, well, how about if I want to know what the weighted number is on this thing? How would I do something like that? It's a little bit more complicated. So I've got gender here, and I might show the results, or I might do a quick table calculation, say percent of total. And I might duplicate this, and instead of having male, I will put generation in here and see, well, what have I got? And I'm going to do the Julia Child routine. More and more people have no idea what I'm talking about when I say the Julia Child routine. But she had an extremely popular show on PBS, The French Chef, and where she would show, okay, we're going to bake the souffle, and she'd put it in one oven, And then she'd go to another oven and take the fully baked souffle out of the second oven. So rather than walk you through this, I've created something for generation. I've created gender breakdown by location. And then I will sometimes build an interactive dashboard out of this. And I will put an N count in the upper right corner. And if I want to know how many female millennials from North America are there, okay, I've got 25. I can see what the breakdown is. Question? Oh, okay. So the question that I have is in the upper right-hand corner, there's this running N. It's saying how many people are responding. I got to show you another way to do this as well because it's cool. This packaged workbook, which probably comprises 90% of what I know about survey, visualizing survey data, that's be available for you to download and look at and go, wow, that's cool, or, oh, that's a really stupid way to do it. I have a better way to do it, which I'm happy for you to tell me about. So this will be readily available for you to download and look at this. So if you want to do the reverse engineering thing and we see, well, you know, I've got a floating element here. I go to the sheet. There's this field that I called N. It just has N equal in it. And I've got this other, I will use this bogus field called color so that I can drag it over the color button and then use one of my predefined color palettes as opposed to not having anything on color, clicking color, and not having the list of color palettes there. If I do that, it just allows me to get it. It's just a little bit of a trick. And I'm just hiding the headers. Actually, I have the head over here so I don't get this extra crap up at the top, etc. And I've just got action filters, so it works very nicely. What I was going to show you, and might as well show you now, is I've got percentages here, but if, let's say I want to do a count of response ID, sorry, I'm going to put count D of response ID over here. I'm going to make this discrete. And if you take something that normally wants to be a measure and say make it discrete, I can now, at any point in this survey, for the most part, be able to see, well, what's my N for this? 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 So I'll show you that, a little bit of that later. And just in case we get make this a packaged workbook. And how convenient it's actually saving it in the right place as opposed to wherever I just happen to open something from. It's a little gripe. So getting back to this item, it's more for me. My clients seem to enjoy it, but it helps me get a sense of who are they, how many people are there, are we going to run into a problem where the N gets really tiny if we're looking for left-handed Latvians from that are female or whatever. Oh, we've only got an N of 3 or something like that. It helps you see where things are thick and thin amongst your respondent count. Well, let's go to our next question that we have going on, the first real question that we have in the thing, which is, do you plan to vote in the upcoming election? So I'm going to start by putting my little question helper up here, which has the grouping that I have. So I have 4 different groups of questions here. I have my Likert scale questions, I have my salary question, my do I plan to vote. Just to show you how that might work, if I could say, gee, I just want to do the check all questions. And then if I then put the question ID up here, it'll know which of the questions, because I said I don't have to have this massive thing like this and say, oh, I want this question and this question and this question and this question. So instead, I can do it by that grouping that we put together. And again, I'll do it with the check all question. And instead of putting Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4 and saying, what is Q1? It's this. What is Q2? I can instead take the wording that I created in that little helper file, and I've got all my stuff there. That I haven't written about or blogged about. Huge time saver. And if you have one of those dual type of questions where indicate to the degree in which of these services, how important are these following services, and you have 20 things. Then you've got the how satisfied are you with these 20 things. If you have that wording thing, the wording will be the same in both places, but you've got the question ID differently, and you've got the grouping is these were the satisfaction questions, and these were the how important questions. Super easy to line them up. So doing this little helper file makes a giant difference. In any case, I want to go to the vote question. And let's get our responses in. And so I'll resort them yes, no, don't know. And let's get, well, how many people said yes, how many people said no, how many people said don't know. Turns out I can take number of records or count response ID or count D response ID. They're all going to give me the same answer in this case. Because we are filtering by this one question, we are not getting the IDs repeated for every question. We're just dealing with that one part facet of this. So this is going to give you the same result each time. Let me go ahead and change this to quick calculation percent of total. There's a reason that I'm not doing the default format for it, because sometimes I need it with decimal places, sometimes without. And I've kind of got a pretty good sense of this item. Well, we now know, do you plan to vote in the upcoming election? Yes, no, don't know. Suppose I want to know, well, how do the responses differ from men and women, by location, by generation, etc.? First blush, you might think, well, let me put gender up here. Oh, let me be ever so efficient and right-click on gender and say, show quick filter. I hate that term, quick filter. And it's like, what is the other filter slow? It's a little bit confusing. And then the problem is, if let's say we make this a radio button, and I look at, all right, here are responses from women, here are responses from men, or if I do this, I do the same thing. It's kind of hard to remember back and forth, you have to remember what were the, what was it for men, what was it for women, etc. So this is useful if your user is only interested in seeing responses from Generation X, and they don't care about stuff. If they, however, want to compare how Generation X compares to millennials, to traditionalists, to baby boomers, etc., this is not a great way to do it. And instead, what I would recommend doing is, well, let me break this down by gender. Now, I now need to change the scope of this table calculation, so it is doing it by text response, and then this may make it a little easier to understand how the scope of it is. I am addressing by the text response, and I am partitioning it by gender, so that it restarts again whenever we get to the gender. So I've got this going on here, and now I can see, oh, yeah, there's kind of an interesting difference between men and women here. Well, now I probably want to do the same thing and see, well, what happens when I do it by location? What happens when I do it by generation? Now, I'm a efficient and lazy developer, and I don't want to create 3 separate visualizations for this. So what would be a cool way to allow someone to explore the 3 different ways of cutting the data? Thank you. And have we ever met before, whomever just said parameter? No, we have not. Thank you. Bravo. We're going to create a parameter. So let me do that on the fly quickly. And create parameter. And I will call this, I don't know if I would call it drill down by or breakdown by, but I'll call it breakdown. I haven't decided what's really right. And if the value is 0, I'm going to give people 4 choices. I don't want to break it down by anything. If it's 1, break it down by gender. And this is what's being displayed. If it's 2, break it down by generation. Three, break this down by location. And parameter control. Excellent. And now let's create a lovely little calculated field here. Call it breakdown by. And you can either be a case when person or an if then person. It doesn't matter. If then allows you to say greater than or equal to. Case only works with equal signs. But I'll say if breakdown equals 0, then I don't want to see broken down at all. Null string. By the way, the reason I'm doing this as equals 0, equals 1, equals 2, equals 3, equals 4, 1 is that's kind of what I'm in the mood for. 2, I've heard performance is like over the course of 1,000,000 years, it will save you 5% of 5 minutes of computing processing time to do it this way. The other is sometimes you have these really long strings. If it's, and what you allowed them to select from the parameter is some long string and you end up trying to copy and paste or you have typos, this is just a little easier. Else if breakdown equals 1, then we want to do this by gender. Else if breakdown equals 2, then generation, thank you. Then I could have said else if locate, but maybe I may end up putting more in here. I realize we can argue about what would be the ideal syntax. So I'm about to break something. When I say break down by, put this here. Oh, it actually is working well. And I'll say break down by gender, where now I want to break it down by generation, where now I want to break it down by location. Very clean, one item, really easy to see, etc. Yes?
I'm sorry, I lost a little bit. Going back, this is beautiful. So when you created breakdown, you said you gave the values.
Mm-hmm.
3 or
1, 0, 1, 2, or 3.
Right.
Hmm?
And were you creating those values right then and there, and then you were telling them what goes in?
What I did was I created a parameter that would have a value of either 0, 1, 2, or 3. Because I knew that there was a none, there was a generation, there was by this, and there was by this. And it worked. By the way, do not, and I mean do not let me get away without showing you the how to do the reshaping in Alteryx. I'm not going to go through every visualization, but I want to go back to Alteryx in a moment. In any case, this is cool, but I want to show you something. Anyone from Deloitte here by any chance? Did some work with Deloitte on their human capital trends report. I am not responsible for the colors, okay? They made me use these colors. But we're trying to show, and we're going to get into this divergent stacked bar chart, and the question was, how urgent are these things in your organization? And where leadership is a great concern and diversity and inclusion somewhat less. And they wanted to be able to drill down by different items. Tell me your eyes didn't go immediately to the stuff in orange. What was happening is there were stories that were in here where there were big differences between different response groups, but it was hard to find them. So I wanted something, a way that would say, if the difference between one group of respondents and another was greater than 10 percentage points, flag it, put it in a different color. You could also say, if it's statistically significant, put it in a different color. So I want to come back to that. And so this kind of came out of a need. We're dealing with some clients. And I've got this going on here, where there may be some pretty significant differences between millennials and traditionalists, or over here, between traditionalists and millennials, 40% versus 57%. Maybe I want something that drives that home. So let me get into how to do that, but let me do one other question type, which is a check all that apply question. And let me show you how to do it with weighted values, because I think that's been a kind of a hot button for people. So let's drag our grouping over here. I'm going to do my check all questions. Let me put the wording of the questions, and I've got to create a calculated field. And I'm going to go with values. And I'll call this check all %. Now, what are I'll do it this way just for clarity. If the value equals 1, then 1, else 0, end. So it's going to... Just checking, thank you. But I'm going to have it iterate through each of these items and add them up. So it's going, did this person say 1? Cool. Did this person say 1? Cool. This person said, this one didn't? Okay. And it will add them all up. So this would give you a count of everyone that said they measure this particular thing. Which things do you measure? Metabolic rate, pupil dilation, etc. Then I'm going to divide this by sum of number of records. This is the correct way to get a percentage check all that apply question. Now, it turns out value is either 0 or 1. I could just say sum of values, because it would just add everything up. We'll add the 1s and not the 0s. I'll explain why I'm doing this later. Click OK. Let me take my check all %, put it right here, sort, show the values, and change this. Change the default format to this to be a percentage. Zero decimal places. And we can now see what it is that people are measuring and not measuring, and it's pretty clear. If I add our breakdown by, I start to see some pretty cool stories here. So I'm going to switch back to the finished version of this. what do you measure, check all that, apply. Oh, you know what? Let me show you how to do the weighted value on it. Again, you're going to look at you're going to have this readily available to you. So here's my check all that, apply questions with, and here's how you would do a weighted. If the value equals 1, meaning they checked it, it's either a 0 or 1. If they said, or if the text response equals yes, then put what their weighting is, else 0, and then divide it by the sum of all weights. And that's how you would get the weighted response here. So that's how you do that. It's not terribly difficult. This is what I wanted to show you, which is in the previous screen, it's a little hard to see that there's a story in here. There's a place where there's a big difference between what men and women have to say about this. So I wanted something that flagged this. You cannot help but go, ooh, there's something going on there. And if you were really hip, you would say, oh, I'll parameterize it. If it's within 5%, if it's within 10%, whether it's in 15%. I'm going to show you a scary-looking table calc. Don't worry. You can see that I'm coloring this by a field called major differences. And if I look at this, all this is saying is look within this set of responses for this question. And if the biggest value minus the smallest value is greater than or equal to 10%, then this warrants consideration. If that's the case, that's this next stop up here, if this value is either the minimum or the maximum, color it as a major difference, otherwise color it as a minor difference. And that's what's making the thing kick out. And so that's how we're doing that. One more item, and then I'm going to shift back to Alteryx. And I could easily go 2 hours on this stuff. How many of you said, you know what, let me grab a sandwich before I grab a little bite on the go? There's this. Were you also the one that said parameter? This is a smart woman, and you got a hot lunch. Okay, make everyone feel, all right. I went years without having to do the following item. How do people rank certain products, certain songs based by different categories? Oh, people in the Northeast, how would they rank these 10 items? How do people in the Southwest rank these 10 items? And then suddenly a spate of clients all needed to do this. And if you were to type into Google ranking within a category, Tableau, you will find a lot of knowledge base articles about how to do it. If you're using Tableau prior to 8.0 and earlier, you've got to do some nested table calculations. If you're using 8.1 or later, there's a ranking function. It's really cool. And I did something for Deloitte, and maybe a month after they published this, I got something so much better. So here are these top 5 trends. Sorted by work region. And if I hover over this, I can see workforce capability is number 1 in Africa, it's number 2 in Asia, it's number 2 in Central, it's number 5 in Latin and South America. You can just see leadership is top or top 2 throughout, etc. My problem with this is, 1, it's a hard read. 2, I can't get everything in. And I actually had 12 trends, not just 5. I took the top 5. So this next thing I'm going to show you is pretty darn cool. At least I think it is. Visual ranking within a category. And let me do this by generation. The trick is you cannot do this in one visualization. It requires interactivity. But what I'm doing here is I can click on an item and see, well, how do these things rank? Adrenaline production, metabolism, blood pressure, and huge story right there that's coming out. And it's really easy to see all the items and it pops out. Traditionalists only measured this 27%. It's ranked fifth versus baby boomers and Generation X and breathing. Huge difference. By the way, do you know why there's such a large difference in here between traditionalists and baby boomers, et cetera? Because I rigged the data so I could say, look how wonderful this is for finding where the cool story is in your data. But I did want to have that. I'm not going to get into how to do it. There's a full blog post on it. This is proving to be a killer way to show ranking within visual ranking within a category. And it's kind of the go-to way to do this. I'll show you one or two more things and then where to find the additional items. But I do need to show you, I don't use the Excel add-in anymore. I'm using Alteryx to do all this. And how many of you, have looked at Alteryx and you see something like this and it looks somewhat intimidating? I certainly felt that way. This is just the workflow, all the things that I just did. I take this, I move it here, I take this, I move it here, etc. Presented with icons and arrows that are pointing left, right, etc. If I were to put a diagram up explaining what I do in the morning to get dressed and go out for work, it would be 10 times more complicated than this diagram. It really isn't that tough. Let me just show you what I'm working through. This says I want to get to a data source. In this case, it's an Excel file. This icon, the filter icon or the Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon icon, is just saying, oh, I had this extra row in there. Don't include that extra row, that thing that had response ID under response ID. This is what I'm using to create the demographics portion. So I'm saying just include these fields: gender, location, generation, and weight. If I decided I want this question to also be a demographic question, that's all I have to do. Similar thing here. I open the data source. Same data source for the labels. And here's where I'm saying transpose the data. Take response ID and then everything else and transpose it. And so that the first column will say respondent ID. The next column, I'll call it question ID. And the next column, I call it label. So it isn't difficult to do this. I'm doing all the joins in here, and then it can either spit out anything. It spit out a CSV file, an Excel file, an SQL database file, or the icing on the cake, it will make a TDE file. And I'm going to run this process. So it just did all the conversions. And I just want to show you what the file looks like. So here it is, everything joined together. I've got the response ID, the gender, the location, the values, etc. Much happier using this tool. If I get new data from a client, no problem. I just put it in. And the same thing I'm using for Excel, I could do this with connected directly to a database. Is Mike Neely here? Any chance? He may be presenting. He's with Ingersoll Rand. He's doing stuff with Qualtrics where he's connecting directly to Qualtrics. He's not downloading stuff or anything like that, and you can just rock and roll it. So it's great. Much better way to approach this. So I just want to show you one more viz type and then where some of the cool stuff is, where you can find and where we can move from here. So let me get to, I want to look at people's salary. I want to show you how to do a jitter plot because it's incredibly easy and it's proving to be a really go-to visualization type. So let me go to the let's bake it up ourselves. I'll put our grouping, and I just want to look at the salary question, and I want to see the average salary broken down by gender. And you can see that on average, men make more than women in this particular data set. Well, let me show you how you can make this thing a little more interesting, and then how you can do like a benchmarking interactive survey with it. So instead of this being average overall, I'm going to put every respondent ID on the level of detail. So I, in fact, have a separate bar for each respondent that's here. Let me change this to a circle. And with your permission, I'm just going to flip it this way. Well, it's kind of hard to get a lot of meaning out of this because you have this mark on top of this mark on top of this mark. So you'll try the, maybe I'll make the color semi-transparent, etc. And it's just not working that well. So what I'm going to do is create a calculated field called, I'll call it jitter. And it is just a table calculation that says, what row am I in the partition? And I'm going to put jitter on columns, but I'm going to compute using the respondent ID. Move this over this way, and now I can put median lines, max, min, etc. There are a few things I do to make this a little, let me show you it out in the field. So this has proven to be an extremely popular viz. It's been downloaded a lot of times, where I have survey responses from 2,398 people. And each one of those dots is a different respondent. So I can hover over dot and get that information. And then I'm just using trend lines to get 95th percentile, upper quartile, etc. I can now type in my own salary. And I can see where am I within this grouping, and gee, let me see where I am within males, etc. Someone challenged me, how dare they? Few things here. One is, and you can read about it on the blog post, and here's the workbook, and it will tell you where to find it. When I do the jitter with this index function here, that is a modulus. Remember modular arithmetic at all? Like the number 7 and 2, or 7 and 12. Both are equal mod 5 because when you divide them by 5, they have a remainder of 2. This is saying divide whatever row the person is in by 11. And put that person in one of 11 different slots. The reason I'm doing this is we're getting into anal stuff, but do you see how clear it is to be able to read the bands? I've kind of narrowed the jitter so that I've got this breathing room on the left and right of it. And it gives me a lot more control. It's also done in case your jitter isn't random enough, so that like the IDs, the lower IDs may have been lower values and the higher IDs are higher salaries, and you don't get this thing which is random. This is a way to say, put this thing into one of 11 slots. In any case, what I did, thank you, is I fixed the scale here. Let's go to show the header of this, edit the axes, and I went from -3 to 13 instead of the automatic, which it was a little too crammed for my taste. So here was one of the challenges I had, which was, show a different icon depending on the person's salary. So, gee, I'm in the lower quartile, I'm sad. Let me change this to I'm above the medium, I'm happy, and hey, I'm Mr. Monopoly right now. So I'm not recommending you do that, but you can dissect the item. I am going over, so I'm going to take 2 minutes to show you stuff, and I want to leave some time for questions. There are only 2 other types of things that I've got going on, and one of them I've blogged about extensively. One is the Likert scale questions, and to what degree do you agree or disagree with the following statements? And I've got both unweighted and weighted versions of these things, and I am convinced that people have gone with just show me the percent of people who selected the top 2 boxes, because you just can't make any sense out of this thing. But if you say, well, let me show you an improvement on it. Here's one way of doing it. I've got a dual axes chart here, and so I've got the not at all, small degree, moderate, high degree, very high degree, and then superimposed is this percentage that said top n boxes. Let me find percentage top n boxes. Here we go. And I'm just saying, if I were to hard code it, I would say if the value is greater than or equal to 4, then yeah, they're one of the people that said top 2 boxes, else 0, then divide by the number of people who responded. What I like about this is I can say, show me the percent that said top box, top 2 boxes, top 3 boxes. This is the way I think people should be showing sentiment of any sort. How much do I like a candidate, etc., broken down in various ways. It's either called the staggered or divergent stacked bar chart, and I've written a lot about it. Someone said, how do you do it with weightings on a forum post? Here's the answer to it. So you can just click there and get it. And then I developed let's do this. A soup to nuts, kind of every way that you might want to do this. No breakdown. Show me the Likert score versus the percentages. Hide the neutrals. Just show positives and negatives, etc. Let me break it down by generation. And I've got a highlighting here and showing where there's a big difference that's going in. The last item, and this just came up, forum post. Someone wanted to see, how do I compare how people responded to this question with how they responded to this question? And here it is. That's, like 800. This is exactly what you need. Oh, you're going to love this. This is meaningless because I've got so many responses on top. So it's how do I jitter this? Okay. Hey, you made it. How do I jitter this thing and get this thing? And huge surprise. I was not expecting this. I do not like packed bubble charts. Okay. I don't think they have any. It's because we're terrible at judging the area of circles. If I were to show you 2 bars, one which is twice as large as the other, you'd go, that's twice as large. If I were to tell you, here are 2 circles, how much bigger is this circle than the other, you go, I don't know, but that one's bigger. That's the only extent that you can do it. So watch what happens with this chart. And I've got it that I just made it that I can choose any 2 particular questions and compare one with the other. I'm going to make, instead of this being continuous, I'm going to say make it discrete. I'm going to say make this one discrete. And we're already starting to get some pretty cool things happening here. Then, if I size this by the number of respondents for each one, count D, it doesn't matter. And let me just change the order of this so that it's going from and it's like, wow, packed bubbles that are useful. And I can see, yeah, there's a really clear correlation with, but if this were a question about how important is something and how satisfied are you, you want to see high importance, high satisfaction. If you're seeing very important and there's a cluster of groups that are saying, and I'm very unsatisfied, I want to highlight that group and see who they are. And I can now do that really easily. But this was a huge, wonderful surprise. Wasn't expecting this. I can break it down. A gender. This is where I was going with stuff. I thought I was going to have to come up with some sort of and did all sort of stuff, and it was nasty and jittered the stuff, and it was complicated. And I made the only thing I don't get with this version is because it is I've only got discrete elements on rows and columns. I can't get a trend line. If I need the trend line, I got to go all fancy on stuff. Or I could just do this. This is exactly the same as this. So let me wrap up with some stuff. Where do you find all these goodies? So I've kind of walked through. I'm making this presentation available to everybody. You can download it. Let me show you 2 items. I'm not trying to shill for the website, but everything is going to be available at datarevelations.com/visualizing-survey-data. The packaged workbook, the PowerPoint presentation, the Alteryx module, the raw data, the reshape data, everything. And I'm hoping to have it by the end of the week, beginning of next week. Questions or concerns or ideas? You can that's where you can download Tableau's white paper. Should I leave that up for another second or so? Okay? Because some Tableau person is going to be really angry with me if I don't go to the next slide, which has the slide that you see at the end of every presentation, which is please take the 3, the survey thing. Oh, let me bring this one up, and if you need that, I'll bring the other one up. So if you can give feedback, etc. I realize people are starved. I've gone over a little bit. Thank you. Thank you.